Good evening, Boston Unity Group. Welcome to our November presentation. We've got a panel presentation tonight on build pipelines for Unity. So we will get rolling with that in just a moment. First of all, we've got some events to publicize. Graham?
Yes, that's me. I have events. Let's see. There is a holiday party that Mass is throwing on the 15th. It's also sponsored by Petrichor and the WPI IMG department rep. So I will post that link in the chat. Let's see, what else is there? This weekend is Game Loop. Game Loop is an unconference. If you don't know what that is, it's pretty cool. It's a conference that doesn't have a schedule. You make it up on the day. You can talk about whatever you want. If you want to be a speaker, you can be a speaker. You can have a bunch of roundtables. It's really cool. I've been going to it for like literally a decade, and it's probably one of the coolest events that we do in Boston. It's virtual again this year in GatherTown, which works really well, actually. So I'll post the link to that in here. Let's see, what else we got? We got the Queer Game Dev Boston monthly hangout happening on the 11th. Yeah, and I'll post the meetup.com link to our Boston Game Dev group. And yeah, what else is there?
Elliot, did you?
Oh yeah, Matthew Brosford asked me to announce he, along with some others, have come up with Tiny Mask Games, and it's kind of like sock puppet.
Sock
I can't
pop.
even pronounce it. Anyway, it's sort of like a group of people in Boston and greater Massachusetts area who get together and they make games really quick, like in a month, and it's kind of they publish them together and they share resources and all this. It's not exactly that, but it's worth looking at. And I think they had their first meeting the other night, and there were like 60 people interested in it so far, developers, artists, everything. And I'm posting into this a link to the information, and so you would have to get onto the Boston Game Dev Slack, which there's the invite there, and also I think, I'm not sure. Yeah, so that's the Boston Game Dev Slack, and then you look for the Tiny Mask Games channel, and there's info there on how to find more. So we're just not publishing it out on Twitch, but I encourage people to take a look at it. I mean, if you don't live in Massachusetts, it's still worth looking at. Like if you're Massachusetts adjacent in some way, so check it out.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, no, anyone who is not offended by talk of Dunkin' Donuts, who has some vague connection to Massachusetts and Boston area and New England. I mean, we're not even all in Massachusetts, let's face it, we're everywhere. But it's a local themed game dev Slack, which is slack.bostongamedev.com. And there are some fantastic conversations that go on there about biz dev, about promoting your games, about making serious games, about using Unity, all sorts of topics. So you're welcome to join that. What was I going to say? My mind has just gone blank. I won't say no if you're from Canada. If you want to join us, I don't think that's a problem. We just ask that you are polite and friendly, which hopefully you should be. So
they're Canadian. They can't be anything but that.
Exactly.
I mean, it's like, yeah.
Sorry.
Well, yeah. So, okay. So we have that. I'm sure there was something I was about to say, and it is completely gone from my brain. So anyway, if it comes up later, I'm sure I'll mention it. Oh, that was it. Socials. We are now on not just Twitter. We also have Facebook. We have a YouTube channel that has our name in it now because we were able to rename it, which is great. The links for all of these are on our Twitch page and also on our meetup as well. And we're also on Mastodon. So if you have migrated to Mastodon recently, you can find us there too. So
it's our Mastodon handle.
I think it's Boston Unity Group.
But what server?
GameDev.place.
.place? Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
Again, the link's on the page. So should all be there for you. So let's hand over for the discussion. So thank you everyone for joining us here tonight. The topic of build pipelines has been requested by a lot of people over the years, I would say. It's a hot topic, and for good reason. Anyone who has made a build in Unity will know it's just so useful to have some way of automating this stuff. So I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then we'll kick it off with some questions and hopefully get this rolling. I'll go down the list in the same order that they're on the meetup. So first of all, we have Michael Carriere, who is the creative director at Zapdot. Hi, Michael. We have Scott Doxey, who is the lead web developer at Tangle. We have Josh Jacobs, who is a software engineer at Cantina Consulting. And we have Kevin Kohler, who is the senior engineering manager at Demiurge Studios. So thank you all for joining us here today. We had a series of questions for you all. How about we start with, what is a build system? And who shall I pick on to answer this first? Let's go, Scott. You're in the top left. Scott, what's a build system?
Something that you don't want to do manually, I think is the best way to describe it. Something that you want to make sure you have confidence in it, something that you can, have happen consistently over and over again. And if you need to pass off the reins to someone else, that they don't have to worry about managing it. Will hopefully just work, until it breaks when Elliot updates the Unity version.
Indeed.
Hey.
Michael, can you explain what build systems do? What do they do?
Sure. I hate to start with the "it depends" answer, but build systems allow you to run a build from Unity, or it could just be a process or a set of scripts, essentially against your repository, with the result of doing what Scott said, where it's having a consistent way that you're building your game or application to create what we would probably call an artifact, which is the build output, which would be your game's build. And it's really useful if you can create that system where it is doing that build for you on a semi-frequent basis, so that you don't have to as a human. This is definitely something that the robots can do for us.
Excellent.
Cool.
Graham, you go next.
Sure. Yeah, so I wanted to know, okay, given all this stuff, maybe I'm a solo dev, maybe, I work on a small team and we make a build once a week or something. Why do I care about making a build system? Why is that important to me?
Let's ask Josh first.
Yeah, I mean, being a solo dev, it's just nice to automate things. I don't know. It's a magical black box that will handle all the dirty stuff that I don't want to do. It'll deploy things. It'll run tests. It'll tell you when things break. It'll tell you when things are passing. It's just a nice to have, really. You don't absolutely need it. I feel like I didn't need it for a long time, but then one day, talking to Scott or just poking around the internet or just doing my job, I realized, why am I doing this? Why am I building manually all the time? It's just such a pain. So it's just nice to have. And honestly, it saves you a lot of time. It has saved me so much time. I don't have to think about it anymore. So it's just a saving grace for development sometimes.
Kevin, do you want to speak to the bigger company picture on that one?
Sure. I mean, I think I agree with what was said there. I think the question is interesting because I think as a solo dev if you're working as a solo dev on a small project, there probably isn't a lot of need for a build process like that, to have a lot of automated builds. There's kind of certain tipping points where things really become useful, right? If you have a lot of non-technical people doing builds, or you have builds to a lot of different targets, or you have builds that are very frequent, you want to launch a build whenever you push to a branch or something, whenever you make a commit, you want to do a build just because whatever, to verify that it works. A lot of those things are mostly important when you have a lot of people working together and you want to make sure nobody's breaking anything. That's not to say I don't think it's worth doing it as a solo developer. One, just for experience, and two, it will, I don't know if it'll save you time overall, but it will, like, you'll be automating out the stuff that's not that much fun. Like doing builds and pushing them is kind of boring. It's the busy work. But I think that the place you really get like gains in terms of like time is really when you're talking about bigger teams.
I'm wondering, you know, like what, like there's a default tool that people use in Unity for this, like that's promoted by Unity Cloud Build is where people usually start. Like, can anyone speak to that? And then like, why start there? And then like, then after that, we'll move on to like other solutions. I don't know.
We started several years ago using Unity Cloud Build. Trying to think, probably in 2012 to 2014. We were building a project that was a multi-platform deck building like card game, and it ran on iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows. And we were able to use Cloud Build to get builds to our testers and all of the people that were playing through that system as a starting point. And for that, Cloud Build was amazing for all of the reasons that it should be. I was able to point it to a repository. It would, on a daily basis, spit out builds for us. And then for us, because I love tinkering, I figured out how I could actually use the web API to control Cloud Build a little bit more. And then from there, I started wanting more and more control over my build system once I started using their API. And at that point, I started wanting more customization that Unity couldn't provide, and then looked for other systems in order to be able to do that.
Does anyone else have experience with Cloud Build? No.
I used to use it when similarly for the desktop builds, desktop and web. It was fine. It was great. Did the job. But beyond that, yeah, then it gets a bit more complicated. There's limitations when if anyone who has ever built for VR or XR or HoloLens will know, you have to have different things installed on your machine entirely to get those things to build, and there's often completely incompatible libraries that you have to take out of the code base in order to compile for another platform, which is fun.
Yeah, we also used Cloud Build for a really long time too, for the exact reasons that Michael outlined. Like, it's super easy to get up and running. You can get builds on test flight and stuff, and then a bunch of issues where, like, just because of the way Cloud Build is set up, like it has these limitations. Like, you can't build IL to CPP builds for Windows because in reality, all the Cloud Build machines are Mac Minis, and so it doesn't have Windows installed on it. And there's all these weird things like that that you run into. But it's a great way to get started because it's like 3 clicks. So definitely recommend it for people who are just like getting their feet wet and this sort of thing. Cool. So like, what did people move on to if you're not using Cloud Build?
Well, I can talk about, I'm using GitHub Actions now, which is for like smaller projects, it's really nice because, you know, I'm not cutting builds every night, but I am doing builds like whenever I merge into develop or whatever on GitHub. And it's nice to just have that automated, and I'm using Game CI with that as well, which I can build for multiple different platforms without having like for instance, like Mac, cutting a build like manually on your machine, you need to have a Mac. But now I can just run them in parallel, like Windows and Mac going at the same time, which is nice.
Cool. What is Game CI? I don't think I've ever heard of that.
It's essentially like a open source set of tools catered towards Unity right now. It runs with GitHub Actions. I think there's a GitLab version and a Circle CI version of it as well. So there's like minor setup you have to do, like you have to set your secrets and such, licensing and all that. But they also have, the other thing that I use from Game CI is the ability to deploy builds to Steam directly. So I can deploy straight to like a pre-release branch. And then so if anybody's like looking at the beta branch for my game, they can just play it right away. And obviously that can be like password protected or not. So yeah, it's been really good for like beta testing certain things to like friends and family when, like they're like, oh, it's broken. And then I just, make a fix and then I push it and it's like, all right, give it like 8 minutes.
Nice.
Awesome.
Does anyone use anything different or want to elaborate on GitHub stuff? Or
I use Jenkins a lot for automating builds.
Mhm.
So that's mostly what I've used. I've done a little bit with GitHub Actions, mostly not for doing builds, but mostly for running unit tests and like doing version incrementing automatically and things like that, which was super useful for. Yeah, Jenkins is great, super extensible. I've used it in very kind of simple ways for a lot of the smaller projects I've done, and it scales up to much more complex things where reaching out to multiple services like artifact repositories like Artifactory and stuff like that for bigger projects.
Mm-hmm. Can you maybe for people who aren't super aware of what Jenkins is, could you just give like a quick overview of like what it is and what it does and that sort of thing?
Sure. I'm trying to think of the right way to describe Jenkins. I wish I had internet right now because I'd look up what they say. But Jenkins is basically a tool for automating builds. You create a project, you create a bunch of steps. There's a lot of nice plugins for it, so it can automatically do things like push to Hockey App is what it used to be called. I think it's like App Center now or something. I don't really remember. It can do stuff like that. It runs with like build nodes. So basically there's a central piece that you organize everything on. And then you can have different build nodes that you set up for like, you could set up Mac specific build nodes that are kind of already configured to do that. It's just a kind of giant system for making builds. You can make it as simple as like basically running a bunch of shell script, and you can make it much more complex than that with like pipelines and Ansible scripts and stuff.
Just taking a step back. So GitHub Actions is like cloud-based, and it's Jenkins, right? Jenkins is cloud or local, or is it just local? Like, how's that work? What's the difference?
I'm sure you can get cloud versions of Jenkins, but I've always installed it on. Well, I've installed it on the cloud in the sense that I've mostly used like Linux nodes in the cloud to run it, but like self-configured, like you can just install it wherever. You can install it on your local machine. And for worker nodes, I just like take Mac minis and set them up in order to do like iOS builds and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We also use Jenkins, and that's been our main build system that we've been using probably for the past 4 or 5 years now.
And is that due to just the customizability of it, or like what's the rationale there?
It was entirely the customizability. One of the major reasons for it is we were working on a serious game that had over 40 gigs of video content. And making those builds and uploading them was just something I didn't have the patience for. And so we wanted a system that would be able to do that for us. So,
wow.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. We eventually got the video down to 20 gigs, but that's a different story. But yeah, so essentially Jenkins gave us the ability to, we set up a Mac and a Windows computer. I set it up at home and was able to get a web server up and running as well. And pretty much we're off to the races at that point. So we had 2 systems that are just running in a closet, getting everything done that we need to do.
That's pretty
cool.
good.
Yeah. So it sounds like GitHub Actions are pretty automatic and they're in the cloud and it's pretty straightforward to set them up. And then Jenkins is sort of the opposite end of the spectrum where there's maybe some setup work, but it's really flexible in what you can do and you have a lot of control over it. I probably know the answer to this. Does anyone use anything else? Any other options?
I've used Bitrise with
Mm-hmm.
a lot of success. That's was kind of like GitHub Actions in the way that you set up the configuration. It's like a YAML file that you can just set up like a whole bunch of operations and they fire off, and you can do it on Windows, Mac, Linux, which is pretty nice. So I worked on a project that was a multi-platform VR medical device, and it was on HoloLens, Pico Neo, the Magic Leap, Gear VR, and Vive, and I had all of those running, which yeah, it was pretty wild. I ended up having separate Unity projects for each one of them, using the Unity package manager to share common assets throughout all of them. But it was it's pretty crazy. It feels like a sunk cost setting it up the first time, because there's a lot of disappointment. But then when it finally works, it's amazing, and then you don't have to worry about it until it breaks. But it gives you confidence, and it's reproducible in a way that you can focus on the things that matter.
I would say for all of these systems, there's definitely a spectrum of system administration, comfortability, being able to work on multiple different operating systems and debug them. Is just like a common problem, challenge, thing that you will need to be ready to handle going into these sort of systems. Some of the most frustrating things that we've had to deal with are just like, Jenkins is running as an administrator and not the user that I'm logged in as. And so you need to like check the services and what users the services are running on, things like that. Along with all of the security requirements of keeping everything up to date, not only your OS, but Jenkins and all the plugins you're using and things like that, just to make sure you're also not creating security holes for yourself on whatever network that you're running it on.
Dedicated DevOps cannot be not come soon enough, can it really? Yeah, it's a whole job. We had a couple of good questions so far. Was there any more of the other questions you wanted to ask first, Graham?
No, let's go for some audience questions.
Okay, great, because we had a great one to start with. How do you manage your Unity license for builds?
It's super fun. You have to have one free license ready to go at any time, or multiple, depending on if you're running a build and a test at the same time. You log in and register that device as a licensed device. You run your tests, and then you release that. And it's, I think the more fun part about that is if the test or build just blows up, and for some reason it doesn't revoke that license, then you're kind of stuck, and you have to go manually do it. I know there are other ways of doing it by creating like a license file, but I've never had any luck with that. So I'm just username, password, and serial, which feels awful. Feels awful. Like there's
wrong.
I stopped. I gave up doing this, but like I used to post in the Unity forums being like, hey, when is manual CI going to be better? And they're like, soon. And I'm like, all right, now, and just like, no, they just stopped responding to me. I'm sure I was bugging the crap out of them, but so someday.
I guess, and Scott, your response is pretty like specific to GitHub Actions, where multiple computers could be bouncing around and using your license at any one point.
Yeah, I ran into the same issue with Bitrise, so it was doing the same like grab a license, use it, turn it.
I think with ours, we did, you can do the manual activation where I don't think it was using the license key file, but essentially there's, I've made sure that through Unity Hub, the computers that are going to be building are activated with an extra key. So you do have to like pay for that. And then once that happens, we're just logging into the Unity services so that the license machine is like verifying that we own that that extra license, and then logging out.
With Game CI, I'm not sure if you actually need an additional seat. I think the way they give you like a YAML file, and essentially you run that in GitHub Actions, and it'll return like this .alf. I don't know what that means, but you take that and like you like upload it manually to Unity, and then they'll return you like a Unity license file, ULF, and then you just add it as like a secret, and then game CI will just handle the rest. So I actually don't have to like worry too much about licenses. Like it's just like a once and done kind of thing with the setup. But I don't know. I've only I'm still using the free tier, fortunately. So it's simple right now. But maybe if I upgrade to professional, it might be a pain.
Right. So like with the like, if you're using a free license though, and like for testing and stuff, it's if you need a pro license to actually build something, then you have a different solution. Like more what Michael's doing. Yeah.
Oh, are you asking? Sorry.
I was just wondering, like, if you.
Oh yeah.
I mean, like, if it's like, say you're doing unit tests, like whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, the licensing issue kind of might get tricky, I guess.
Oh, so I mean, so far I have a free account that I'm just using for builds, and so it doesn't seem like I haven't hit any limitations yet. At least I guess is what I'm getting at. And I don't know if I will soon or eventually, and I'll cross that bridge when it comes to it. But right now, it's been pretty easy, easy going.
Do you have anything to add to that, Kevin?
I was going to say, I feel like when I haven't done Unity builds for a few years, but I think we just put licenses on the machines, which is probably the bad way to do it, because then obviously you're taking up a license seat with a machine. But I think that's how we did it. We really only had a couple build nodes. So because those were static build nodes, we just set them up with licenses and let them run.
Yeah, it feels like in an ideal world it would be just a case of an authentication token system, but anyway.
One of the things I asked was, I was like, can you please just make it so when you run a unit test, you don't need to have a license. Like just running unit tests. Like you don't. Why would you need a license for that? I don't understand. But they didn't budge. So, I mean, they said they were working on it, which meant that they were trying to get me to stop talking.
Yeah, it's a very polite way of saying go away.
Another question from Breed Robot. Does any hang on? See now it's every time I hover over this thing, it puts markers over it, so I can't read the text. That's not very helpful, Twitch. Does anyone do automated builds for console platforms? Have you found it worth it?
Certain NDAs around the build process for consoles, so it's kind of a tricky question to answer.
It happens. I have just been working on a project where there are automated builds on all of the platforms that go through all the time, and if one of them fails, then alarms go off. But I don't know how it happens.
I would say, to answer the second half of that question, it's always worth it. Especially if you're building for console and you need builds to be happening often, that is where a build system shines.
Mm-hmm.
Are there associated like additional costs to using these systems in monetary?
Jenkins is free.
And
GitHub Actions cost money based on how much you use. They start free, and then if you have a certain number of like machine minutes that you can use, I think in a month or something like that. I think for the stuff I was doing, I never hit any of those limits. But the stuff I was doing is pretty lightweight. I imagine if you're doing a lot of builds, like you're just doing constant builds, you'd probably run into that limit pretty quick.
Yeah, it's like 2,000 minutes a month, I think. And then I think your artifacts or your packages can be like 500 megabytes max. I think. Don't quote me on that, but.
Do they also include data transfer as part of that, or are the minutes like your data transfer is unlimited with GitHub Actions?
That's a good question. Do you know that's? I don't think it's count. I don't think it's added.
I don't think so.
I think it's
just
just the minutes.
Based on what you're or how you're sending it would be based on the minutes.
Of course, the other issue with Jenkins, though, by contrast, is that while it is potentially free, the hardware probably isn't. Let's face it. Unless you have got a box that you found lying at the right side of the road, you still got to power it up somehow. And then there's cloud costs too, which for cloud-based Jenkins, has anyone, or cloud-based not Actions, hosting providers. What do you use and why? Or do you
We
run
use
locally?
AWS because that's what we use for everything. So
Sorry, Graham,
Yeah,
I interrupted you.
no, it's all good. I was just saying we use AWS because that's what we use for everything. So
that's the experience I've had at the companies I've worked at too. It's just like, well, we use AWS, so that's, you know, it's cheap to rent a Linux machine there as anywhere.
We had Jenkins just running on the local web server. Essentially, like it can spawn its own web server to be able to serve the pages, and that's doing the trick for us. I've thought about having that one separated from the Mac because like the Jenkins is also on our Mac build system. And so like sometimes that's a decent setup where you just have a web server that's running Jenkins and it is instructing all of your different agents / nodes to do their work.
Is there you might have already said no to this, but when you're using GitHub, like they charge you for like LFS bandwidth and all these things, is that none of that comes through if you're like starting up instances or whatever?
Oh, it does. So like I mentioned for that 40 gig project, we spend our GitHub like costs per year are still pretty low, but all of the data transfer to pull those things are using your GitHub bandwidth for downloading.
is that
But
true?
again, it's not that bad.
Is that true if you're using GitHub Actions to build, or is it just because you're using Jenkins that you need to pull stuff down?
I don't think so. For GitHub Actions, I mean, if you're sending it out to a third party plugin, then I would say like through Bitrise, that would be a cost.
Got it. Okay.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense for GitHub Actions because everything is probably internal on their network. And
Yeah,
so you're not hitting that. Whereas I'm downloading the repo onto our local server. So sure.
Yeah, it makes me wonder. I mean, that might be a cost benefit in a way, because I mean, I've worked on projects that are easily 80 to 200 gigs all the time, which sounds insane, but that's reality. And I know that like GitHub will charge for like every time you pull down, it's like, oh, you just use bandwidth. I mean, the prices have gone down a bit since they have been before, but still. It accumulates.
We did have a good question here. Has anyone had experience building off plastic, since that seems to be Inti's preferred version control these days? Tumbleweed?
We use GitHub. Sorry.
I'm particularly interested in this question. I just starting a project today that they're like, we're using plastic. Have you used that? I was like, no. I'm wondering about this.
We use plastic, but I don't know the inside. Like, I don't know how that works. I only understand the whole Git side of it, because that's the part that I'm working on.
It's been a while since I've looked into
it. I was going to say I can look into it and post it in the Slack.
I don't know if I remember when I looked into plastic that they do allow, like there's a version where they do allow you to connect to your plastic server through like a GitHub API or Git API or Git instance like type of thing. So there might be a way to even just use Git through plastic if it doesn't have a connector. But that's one really nice thing about Jenkins is it's agnostic to your version control system. It works with SVN, it works with Git. It doesn't need to be tied to GitHub. It could work with other things as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we use Jenkins with Perforce and Git, and it works great.
I mean, so there's like, we're talking about build systems, but what is a build system? What is your build system? What's the anatomy of a build system for you all? Like, what is it doing?
It's a loaded question. I guess I can speak to mine at least. So it's essentially just a giant YAML file, which is, perfect for me. It is game CI doing the builds and game CI deploying the builds, but I have custom build scripts for Unity that I can pass flags to for setting what are they called? Scripting just like script. What is it called? Scripting symbol. Yeah, a scripting symbol. And so I'm essentially building out for Steam and Itch, but I'm using the Steam API for like leaderboards and achievements and such. So that is all being like, contained within like if Steam and then Steam logic and then end if. So that's like about as complex as it gets, really. On the other side of things, I do have a few libraries that I'm using GitHub Actions to build like Unity packages for that I can like include in my project or DLLs or whatever. And I'm kind of getting more into like Unity package management. So I'm just like, adding that via Git.
Cool.
I have some screenshots that might help answer this question.
Let's do it.
Show and tell.
Okay, let me see if I can share this thing.
Michael came prepared.
Can you see these like screenshots and stuff? So we use Jenkins for two different things. We use it for PR checks, and I can talk about that really quickly. And we also use it for our nightly builds. And so the PR checks would be considered continuous integration or CI. And so every time anybody puts up a pull request on our project repository, we have it run a series of builds essentially. And so this also reports back to GitHub. So every PR can say, have all of the checks passed. On every single PR that we run, especially for this project that I'll be showing off, we run edit mode tests. If the project has play mode tests, we can enable those. We then do validation with Odin Validator, and I talk about this to anybody who will listen. Odin Validator is one of the best like things that you can add to your Unity project. I don't get any credit for saying that or any kickbacks. I wish I did, but that's always a run for us. And then we'll automatically just do an iOS and Android build for this just to make sure that the build succeeds. You then can, like, we do some additional parsing on the back end. And so like the edit mode tests, we parse that out and then send that into Git so we can even look into the details of our checks if something goes wrong to see why it's failing. Jenkins kind of looks like this. And so what you just saw for our different checks, oops, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is what like the dashboard on Jenkins looks like. So you can see how long each one of these tests run. And you can see here for the same project, like Android builds are painfully long. They're about 3 times as long for that. And then, this is the same project, but it's across different platforms. And so on iOS, we run our edit mode tests, our build mode tests. We build the app, we then publish it. So this will automatically go up to test flight. And then our Windows builds are a lot more intense, where we do that for Steam and then Itch side by side. And so we'll go through and we'll build over to Steam. Windows also has a code signing step where we have we do token validation. So there's like a little USB dongle plugged in, and it does a special Windows thing so that when you pop up the computer, it doesn't say like, we don't know the developer. It'll say Zapdot instead. Another cool thing that I'm so excited that we did this. And so every night there's also a special build channel for all of our projects. We have a build for each, or a message goes to Slack for each one, but then threaded conversations happen with each step. So if something ever fails, all I need to do is look at the thread for that in particular thing, and I get to see which build failed. And I have a link directly to the logs to see why something went wrong. I didn't take a screenshot of it here. But we also have messages to our channel. So if an engineer or an artist or designer puts up a PR and that PR fails, we'll have a message that goes directly to the team chat to say, like, your PR failed, go fix it. Another thing that's cool about Jenkins is that there's this like console log parsing tool that we use to parse all of our Unity logs. And so this is another thing that you can get from Jenkins as one of their plugins. And so I can kind of see I've like created special rules that I can just immediately jump to and see, in this particular area, this is where the Windows build was starting. This is where the code signing was starting. And I can kind of quickly jump around to look at the logs, which makes Unity logs so infinitely more parsable. This is what Groovy looks like. So this is actually what the script of running an edit mode test is. The major part of the script is actually just like running Unity and like the command line thing to run that. So really quickly, this pretty much says, I'm going to run Unity here. I'm going to, run it in batch mode. I'm going to run it with that particular project structure. And then this does the parsing that gets the this text file out. And then we parse that text file to make sure that there's nothing wrong with it. And then we move on. And it also does this where this is, it updates Slack to change that threaded message. And then we've also got a playtest running where we're keeping our playtest updated with all of these build scripts, but I'll send that. I'll talk about that later. But yeah, so I've used up too much time.
Brilliant.
Always be closing. I love it. Does anyone else want to talk about their setup specifically?
I can share a setup in the Slack after I started looking into doing GitHub Actions without game CI. I don't know why I had to torture myself, but I wanted to figure out how everything worked, from the basics. So I went and did everything from downloading Unity to installing it and running unit tests and building. So it's pretty basic right now. It just does Linux builds so that you get WebGL and Linux, I think, is the only plugins you could download for that, which kind of a bummer, but it is the quicker one and the less expensive on GitHub Actions. So that's why I started with that one. But I can share that with the group. So
cool, thanks. Kevin, what does the build system look like for Demiurge? Is it similar to what Michael showed, or is it more extensive, or?
Probably. Well, so most of my experience is pre-Demiurge back at HitPoint.
Okay.
So I would say the Unity stuff was pretty similar. We probably did a little bit more, or I don't know, maybe this didn't show it, but we did a little bit more with different builds to different locations based on what branch you were pushing to. So we would maintain different kind of levels of reliability. So dev builds, you kind of expect them to be broken, and then we'd have QA builds and production builds and pre-production staging builds, I think we usually called them. We did stuff like that. At Demiurge, I deal with some pretty complex systems. They are pretty similar to what Michael has showed. But at this point, I'm not running them. I'm doing a lot of third-party stuff. So I've been working with Blizzard and Riot. They have pretty complex systems, but they're actually, Jenkins is pretty common in the industry, and the build systems don't look all that different.
Cool. Do we have another question from the audience, Chris?
We have so many good questions from the audience. It's been I'm having to pick and choose.
Nice.
There was a good one in here, which is hopefully easily solved. What's the min spec for a Mac for iOS Unity builds? And how old can the Mac be? And can you build without a Mac? That's another question.
Can't build IL to CPP iOS builds without a Mac. You can do mono builds that exported IPA, I believe, on Windows.
I think your limitation on the Mac is really just what version of Xcode you need to run and whatever the oldest computer that Apple supports that lets you do that. So our build systems right now are on probably 2017 or 2018 Mac Minis, back when they were still x86, so that I actually have one of them running Windows. And those can continue to age, and I'm not really worried about it. Throw a lot of memory in them. That'll make your life easy. And then because they're automated and you're not touching it, who cares if it takes an extra 5 minutes,
Also make sure it has a big enough disk space, because that can be a problem.
We do have a 10 terabyte external drive plugged into our systems for that sort of storage.
Nice.
Yeah, right. Xcode always updates, and then they kind of grandfather out older OSs and stuff like that. So if you have something that's running High Sierra, or I don't know, or Sierra or something, is probably your cutoff point.
I would always recommend, if anyone is looking to update a build on an iOS, multi-platform. Launch Xcode a week or two before you have to start working on it, just to get things rolling, just to find out where you're going to have to be spending the next 2 years of your life trawling through Apple's documentation as to what has changed and where they hit all the menus this time. So yeah.
This is like related to the Mac stuff. Like, do your build scripts actually handle like all the weirdness with like how you might have to, like, if you build with Unity, how you might have to go in and change things in Xcode because Unity doesn't handle it? Like,
Yeah, it's all in the post.
Yeah,
nice.
having to change the XML files and the like all of that at runtime, which.
To give Unity some credit, especially when it comes to Xcode, they created this class that will like in C# edit Xcode projects, and so it's quite actually it's pretty easy to automate nowadays and pretty easy to code.
My original script was in Bash, but once I found out about that, I quickly switched over to that because Bash is great until you have to do something really fancy with it, and then it's crazy.
Yeah, that's terrible. We had a pretty extravagant system for Cozy Grove where we could hit a button and it would make. So we were Apple Arcade, so we would make a build for iOS, iPadOS, tvOS, and macOS, and we would have a script that would do all of the code signing and everything, and then it would also do the upload. So it would upload it to the App Store. So it would just be ready to go and we could just hit a button and put it on test flight or something. And we did that pretty late in the development, just to get back to an earlier point. And like I was doing that manually at one point and I was like, we don't need to do this. It doesn't take that long. And it saved so much time. Oh my God. It paid for itself instantly. So yeah. So even if you're just doing it yourself, definitely recommend it.
And another question from the audience. How does CI/CD work when using the Unity addressable system with remote bundles?
So we did that in a recent project, and I mean it works. So the essentially along everything that you saw in the screenshots that I just showed, there would be another step that says build addressables, and the addressables kick out the that build would kick out the addressable artifacts, and then you would add another step that does the upload. And so for the project, we've done a few different projects like this. One of them where it's actually using asset bundles, we then need to take that and upload that to PlayFab ourselves. We haven't automated that part of the system. But there was another one where our remote asset bundles were, we were actually using the addressable system, and those were just uploaded to AWS with another build step for that sort of thing. And then the system kind of managed that on its own. That was one thing I was going to mention, is that if you're using addressables or you're needing to like push stuff to AWS, this is like yet another area where a build system shines for you.
Just want to call out Hardcoded2 in the chat mentioned Fastlane as a tool for iOS code signing, and I would highly recommend that. It's very good.
That's cool. Yeah, apparently there was some breaking changes to GitHub Actions. Hardcoded2 again was having trouble with that. Has anyone experienced any changes in GitHub Actions from Node 12 to Node 16?
Yeah, I'm getting lots of warnings now.
Oh, good.
Things are deprecated. I have to make changes.
Yeah, I'm glad I don't have to deal with Node anymore. Oh, for now. Never say never. How often do you perform maintenance on your Jenkins servers? How often should you perform maintenance on your Jenkins servers?
Frequently, there's like always 0-day exploits that are popping up for Jenkins, just because it's open source and it's used by a ton of people. And so I'm very commonly updating all of our plugins, handling any sort of security updates, anywhere from like every week to every 2 weeks. It's very quick. You're essentially, they've made it to a point where you can go in, click a couple buttons, it'll run through. it automatically restarts Jenkins and you're good to go. I would say updating Xcode is far more painful than updating Jenkins for me.
I mean, to be fair, Xcode is synonymous with pain, so
Yeah, it is. Yep.
there's that. Yeah, I mean, and on that, and if you're using old Macs with old systems, you have an inherent security issue there too. Like if you're using old OSs and things like that. So it sounds like there's like a big upfront cost to setting up these systems, and then it's kind of like minor like trickle maintenance to maintain security and tweak them. Like unlike your largest projects or most complex servers, like how many hours, human hours do you think it took to be invested to get this, set up the way you want? Like how long did it take you to set up the type of server you have now? Or system, I mean. So like Josh, it probably has one of the simpler ones. So like how much time did you invest into that?
It was probably like if we were to say like I started on Monday, it probably only took until like Wednesday or Thursday, and this is like I am only working like after hours, so a couple hours a night, if that. It really wasn't too much of a hassle, and given I'm only building to Mac and Windows with 2 Windows builds, but yeah, very lightweight. Like you could probably do it in an afternoon if you were just like focused in on that.
What about Scott, who rolled his own?
So that can definitely cause a lot of problems rolling your own, because you have to wait to find out if it worked. And that wait includes downloading Unity, running the tests, like downloading Unity, downloading the plugins, installing both of those, and then seeing something failed, and then starting that process all over again. But the good thing is once you get it going, you can then copy all of that knowledge from one platform to another, and then make small tweaks here and there just to get things to work. And it is kind of a pain to get it to work, because like sometimes you will run into an issue where you're like, well, this will work better running on Windows. And it's like, well, I have to change the entire architecture to work differently, because the setup that we have works on Mac, or it, we have it running on Linux, and the sunk cost can be big if you're dealing with rolling your own in the cloud if you can't test it locally. But go with something that someone else has already struggled through. I don't know why I do this to myself, but I think it's the fact that it's a puzzle, and I want to know how it works.
Perfect engineer answer. I love it.
Yeah.
For Jenkins, setting up Jenkins, like the web service itself, took me maybe half a day. Like that part went pretty quick. And then for any given build, again, maybe another half a day to a day. The only thing that ended up being a huge time sink for me was like setting up the actual iOS build nodes and getting all of the like key management set up correctly, and that stuff was kind of a pain. Eventually, this is not Unity stuff, but eventually my company was doing a lot of like web server backend building. And for that, we ended up hiring 2 DevOps people eventually. So then we had like 2 people working on it full time, and we had a super elaborate system that was using lots of cool little bits. But yeah, I'd say a couple days total.
We eventually switched. So there's 2 different types of Jenkins projects. There's what are they called? Freestyle, where it's like you use their web UI to build your projects out and that sort of thing. Like if you can get the Jenkins service up and running and access the web page, you can get your builds running relatively quickly. We eventually switched to something that's called the declarative pipeline, where it's actually everything in your pipeline is a script, and that's actually the script that I wrote. It's in Groovy, which is kind of like a Java derivative, and so that switch probably took me several days to kind of just like get that all moved over. But what Scott is saying is applies here too, is that now I've got this script that I literally can copy to every other project that we use. And it's in our GitHub repository. And so it is versioned, and we can comment it and talk about the changes and look at the history just like you would your project. So there are benefits to that too.
Yeah, using the web UI and just like typing shell script into a little like web UI box and being like, hopefully this just works forever. Like no real, I mean, the whole system might be backed up every day, but like no good version backups of it is a little scary. Yeah, we switched over to using that too, we switched over to using that basically when we had DevOps to run it. So.
Do we have more questions?
A quick question of the Manic George. Good question here. Haven't gotten too into the weeds of builds before. Josh, you mentioned making 2 Windows builds. Can you explain why?
Oh, okay. Well, so I'm building for itch and Steam, and essentially I have my Steam build and my itch build, and it's really just as simple as that, because I'm using the leaderboards and achievement stuff with the Steam API, and I don't want that happening in the itch build because that could be bad.
So I guess if you're not using those sort of integrations, then you could probably use the same build in both places. But I
kind of shot myself in the foot there. No. Maybe one day I'll roll my own leaderboard, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked a lot about like these automated systems. Like, does anyone like in the beginning or at some point just make like editor scripts to build for different platforms and do things like that? And like for someone getting super into like just entry level build script building, like is that a recommended route? Or
yeah, I always start with an editor script with a makefile or some sort of script that I can use to automate running that locally. So that way it's not just I have to open up Unity and click on some sort of drop down. I can just like have Unity closed. I can just run the test clean or run the build clean. Same thing with tests. I will have a makefile target that I can run tests without having Unity open. So that way it's all, turn off the GUI and all that other stuff. So, and then I can translate that over to something that is on like Bitrise or GitHub Actions.
cool.
Awesome.
I'm trying to find. Oh, I think this is it. So what we did at Zapdot is we did the very engineering thing, and we built this entire build system, and we were going to turn it into a Unity plugin, and we've shared it with some people where it allows us to create custom builds, but also the same thing can be run through CI so that I can make the same thing that our build server is creating. And then when we were thinking about releasing it, there is this other plugin that we found in the asset store that you might want to look into where you don't have to worry about writing your own build scripts, but it's called Easy Build System. Ton of great reviews, 141 reviews right now, 5 stars, and it's on sale. But we've been thinking about potentially even switching to that and ditching the system that we've been building for like 4 years. It's nice, we love our work, but they might have done a little bit more there. But yeah, definitely like write your own build script just to understand what that is, and you get the benefit too of just understanding like creating more consistent builds across the thing rather than just going into Unity's like build settings and changing that around.
Is that something you can post a link to? I searched
just
Easy
put
Build
it
System.
in the
Cool.
the Twitch stream, at least the Twitch chat.
Nice.
Related to build systems, how do you handle large file artifacts? Do you just use Git LFS or any special repository? How do you handle big stuff on Unity? It's a difficult question.
I have some experience with that. So this wasn't an asset that was like part of the actual game, but it was more of like a third-party plugin that was massive, and it wasn't available to download online. It was something that was like, they sent it to me in like a Dropbox. So I had this like preview SDK, and I'm like, this is massive. I'm not going to put this in my repo. So we put it somewhere that we could download it from, like, I think we had an AWS or something. So that way it was like ready to go. We could just pull it down every time we ran a clean build. And then we would ignore it locally. So that way we could still build with it. So that way it wasn't in the Git repo, because the Git repo would have been massive. And that way we could at least cache it too. If the version didn't change, we could cache it in the build pipeline. And it kind of sped things up by not having it in the Git repo, which was nice. I mean, we were using Git LFS for other things, but we figured that that would be a little excessive to put something that would never change in there. So.
Are we talking about large file artifacts in terms of like the build results of what you're doing? If that's the question, I mean, a lot of the builds, like, we're just pushing them up to Steam or test flight, and that's Valve's problem after that. So, I mean, and then past that internally, we'll have it on like local storage. And if we need to move it around the team, it'll be Dropbox or Box, depending on who needs to get to it.
And I guess in terms of build servers, if you wanted to say, if you had some less frequently changing assets that were very large that you didn't want to have to download each time you wanted to run an automated build, you would have some kind of way to cache them, potentially on a Jenkins instance somewhere. Yeah. How configurable is Jenkins for caching and things like that? I haven't actually played with that.
If you're running those computers and you own those computers, you're effectively like it's just a bunch of scripts. So you can save it off to a folder on your computer, and then you just need to reference it there. So that would be a way to do it.
This is a question that I had about, like, how does changing Unity versions affect your build systems? Like, if someone can you build the multiple versions of Unity without making changes to your system, or does it just handle that? Anyone?
I think Game CI will just. Oh,
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
All right.
All right.
Game CI has a. It must be like a cron job or something that just monitors every 15 minutes whenever Unity puts out a new release, and then they will create a Docker image based on that release. So they have everything going back to like 2018. And so as long as you don't try to build like 15 minutes after the release comes out, which would be crazy, you could download it and I don't know if you could do that, that'd be crazy. But yeah, I mean, it seems like it'll handle it, but
seems like something Elliot might try. 15 minutes after a build goes live, she's like, oh, new builds.
That's why I'm asking.
Someone on the inside for that.
I think it says a lot for Game CI that they check every 15 minutes for new Unity releases.
Yeah. So if you're using GitHub Actions without Game CI, or whatever,
then you talk to Scott.
Yeah. So I actually wrote a tool, oddly enough, that will check the version of the Unity, like the project version.txt file, and it will parse that, and then it will check against a list of all of the recently released versions of Unity, and then find the download for the platform that you're running it on, and it will extract everything for you. So, because I found myself doing that manually a lot, and so I wrote a tool to do it for me.
Nice.
How does Jenkins handle that?
So I do something similar to Scott, except it rather than download Unity at that point, it depending on if it's running on a Windows or Mac, I have a function that will take that output and then like go to the right Unity hub location for where the executable lives on the computer, and then it runs it. So
I have a separate tool that does that too.
Okay.
I have one that says find Unity and one that says get Unity, and that's the two tools.
You guys should talk.
Probably. It's all open source. It's all on my GitHub repos or my GitHub profile.
Doing that for us, we just need to make sure Unity, the version that the system has been upgraded to, has been installed on our build servers, and that's a manual thing, but it's easy, and then everything else just works.
Scott, you should post your GitHub.
Yes, good plan.
Link in the chat.
Okay.
Post your link. Apparently, Unity Setup PowerShell is also a great tool that is somewhat regularly updated by other people. I haven't used PowerShell with Unity, but it does sound like it's pretty good. The link is in the chat for anyone interested. GitHub, Microsoft/Unity setup.powershell.
There's also a similar, I think it's called Hub or something like that, where you can download it off of Brew for macOS users, where it'll allow you to, in the console, manage Unity installs.
Nice.
Cool. So what haven't we talked about yet? Does anyone have like burning desires to talk about? Oh, my build system does this cool thing that we haven't talked about yet. Like it, I don't know, shoots me in the face with a, Nerf dart whenever I break the build, or anything like that. Or, I mean, it sounds like we're all pretty straightforward, but.
Backups are useful. So like that was one thing that bit me in the ass, is that when you set up a Jenkins server, so when we were talking about the freelance or freestyle projects, it's all saved locally on the server. And then I had a Windows computer, like the hard drive corrupted, and I had to rebuild everything. And so that was another reason why I wanted to start moving to just declarative. So that's very painful. So just do that. Like make sure you're doing, like, now that Windows computer, I have like a mirror of it, so that I can just flash a hard drive if it ever burns again.
You have a spare 10 terabyte laying around somewhere.
That's just for the build.
Backups are only good if you verify them, because I remember at one time at HitPoint we had a similar issue, and our backup was failing for some reason, and we didn't have an alert on it. So make sure those backups are actually happening, so you're not stuck with like a full backup.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered most things. I mean, the only thing is the cloud platforms. We've only ever talked about AWS. There is obviously Microsoft Azure. There's also, I think IBM have cloud stuff. Google exist as well. But everyone kind of talks about AWS because it's what we all talk about. I have used Azure before, and it is pretty cool. It just comes down to which one you prefer to work with, I guess. Any thoughts on that, anybody?
We're all Google Cloud, which feels weird because it's like nobody else that I talk to uses it. So I'm like trying to share my pain and troubles, and people are like, well, I have my own pain, on AWS or Azure.
Okay. Anybody else?
Michael, you have like a bunch of computers in your closet or something, right?
Yep.
The cloud.
Yeah, that's my cloud.
Nice. Yeah, one of our build nodes is a computer in somebody's closet, and it's like the list in Jenkins just says like Preston's closet. It's really funny.
I'm tempted to repurpose some more PCs for building, just in the background.
Yeah, they're perfect for this sort of thing.
Yeah, it's good for winter weather. Just stick one in the three.
Warms everything up.
Okay, stick it in the 3-season sunroom, and it'll be fine for the 4th season. Then, a couple of build servers constantly running.
Oh yeah, if I'm ever cold, I'll just like spin up some Unity tests while I'm working on my Mac, just on my PC. My whole room will just get nice and spicy.
Amazing.
Awesome. Oh, we definitely need to. We need to get one of you guys to help Elliot get an automated upgrade Elliot's Unity projects for him, because he seems to quite like that whole upgrade malarkey. Thank you, everybody. Do we have anything else that we wanted to ask? I've looked for more questions. I think we've asked all of the biggest questions. If anyone had any more questions, please ask away now. But I wanted to say thank you to our panelists for coming tonight. And we have a giveaway tonight. Those of you who have stayed to the end, you are lucky winners, potentially. We have some licenses for JetBrains Rider to give away. All we need you to do is to answer a question. How hard should we make this question? Audience.
Not that hard.
Audience.
'Cause-
What's the name of the build tool we have mentioned throughout the show that is used to create builds for you? That is not.
Starts with a J.
Yeah, might be a butler of some sort. Type it in chat. Type it in chat. First one's
people,
type
yes.
in chat. You get licenses.
Yes. First 5 people to answer, get them.
Yep, you want them, you got to grab them.
All right, we got 3.
3 more. Come on.
We got 3 so far.
What?
We don't need auto promotion. Please don't. No, we just want you to have licenses
All right.
if you have one of them. We have got 5
1, 2,
winners:
3, 4,
Wave
5.
Wash,
Yes.
JJN Creator, KS Takeor, K Pable 7, and Ubivore. That's a cool name. Thank you.
Yeah.
You are all winners. And what I would like you to do now is to, I guess you need to talk to us, message us, and send us your emails. In fact, if you could message me, D Strawberry Girl. If you message me, it's on my computer where I can get to direct messages. If you can right click and whisper to me, you should be able to then type me a message and send your email address. And then what we'll do is we'll send you an email with the key to get hold of your copy of JetBrains Rider, which is a superb editor for Unity projects, for Unreal projects, for all sorts of projects. It's extremely good, and we've all used it and loved it pretty much. So
Pro tip with these free keys, you can use them for a thing called .ultimate instead of getting just Rider, and that includes Rider and their testing tools and their profiling tools as well. So you can get actually more than just Rider with one of these.
Right. It unlocks like
good.
anything JetBrains.
Yeah, anything C# related, the .ultimate bundle will get you access to.
there we go.
So
I'm very disappointed no one had the Jenkins handle though. That would have been really cool. They wouldn't even have to
somebody's
say
Twitch
anything.
handle is Jenkins.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Just streaming Jenkins development on Twitch.
It's just live builds.
Yeah.
Twitch plays Jenkins.
Oh, that would be good. Yeah.
I can't talk to a couple of you because you have whispers blocked. I'm so sorry, folks. You'll need to message me first. Oh, you go. Okay, I got Ubivores. Thank you. Ubivore, Wavewash, thank you. JJN Creator, KPable7. I can't message you. Who else did we have? KS Takeor. Do I have you? Let's see if I got your email address. I'm not going to let you guys go until we've got this because I can't talk to you either. You've got to message me first. And then I'll be able to send you your stuff. Any other comments?
Can I show our playtest?
Yeah.
Oh, show it. Yes, please do. Please do.
So Zapdot's working on a, I'm biased, but it's a pretty cool minimalist puzzle game that you need to kind of learn the rules in order to get through the game. Obviously, we're still working on it, otherwise I'd have a better pitch than that. But it's called Cypher Zero, and we'll also be showing at the Mastigi event. But if you want to jump in the playtest and give the game a shot, we're doing observed playtests where people can jump in with the devs and talk to us while you're playing, and also unobserved ones if you're shy or you're busy. So I'll post a link in the chat, and I would love to get your thoughts or your analytics data for getting through the game.
Honesty.
Send Michael your data. He's trustworthy. We trust Michael.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have anything they want to plug? Scott, Josh, Kevin? Any projects you're working on?
I mean, Demiurge is hiring if anybody wants to apply.
Nice. Where can they find out information about that?
DemiurgeStudios.com, I believe. Although, be easier to check on networks.
Oh, right, of course. Yeah, let me pull up the link. Also, if you are not in the Slack yet, there is a jobs channel in the Slack where people frequently post jobs. So that's another avenue to find out this sort of thing.
Ooh, I just
Cool.
clicked the wrong thing. I'm almost
Does
there.
anyone else have
4
any,
out of 5.
Anyone else have anything to plug?
I guess I could plug my game. It's in early access. It's a
Absolutely.
shoot 'em up. Constantly working on it. It's constantly getting further away from release. So, it's on Steam and it's hard. But I've got a new release coming out very soon. Big graphical update and yeah.
Nice. Do you have a link to a like itch page or Steam page we can?
Yeah. Let me post it. I can post it here. Is that cool?
Yeah. Yeah, please. Yeah. Sweet. What about you, Scott? Anything going on?
I mean, I'm still working on that poker game, but that's never going to be released because whenever I work on it, I decide to come up with a new open source project, and then I focus on that, and then I release that, but not the game. So so I have plenty of open source projects that people can use, and they're all out there, but the game isn't. And I guess the only other thing to pitch would be the product that I'm working on. Tangle is built in Unity, and it's pretty awesome. It's a remote collaboration app that I've tried a whole bunch of them, and I mean, I'm biased now, but like when I first tried it, I was like, this is like, I feel like I know my coworkers more than I knew my coworkers. Like, I feel like I know them better than the ones that I would see in the meet space, like, you know, in real life. Because I don't know, the interactions are pretty awesome. They feel meaningful, and Tangle.app is where you can check it out. A really cool promo page that we launched a little while ago, for in early access. I don't know. I work on the webpage. I work on the API. I don't really do too much with the app. So
It's pretty.
I'm
cool.
like I'm squirreled away in like a basement somewhere, just working on the API, and everyone else is working on the fun flashy stuff. This is
Roasting
actually
chestnuts on your build shoulder.
a Tangle price shirt. No, I'm just
Nice.
rambling.
Cool. Anything else we should talk about before we wrap it up?
I think we're good. Thank you, everybody, for coming this evening. Thank you to our audience for hanging out with us tonight. Thank you very much to our panelists, Scott, Josh, Kevin, and Michael. And thanks, everybody, for coming this year. We don't have a meeting in December.
Right.
So we will see you all in January 23. Another new year.
Right. I think a bunch of us might be going to the holiday party thing that's on the Boston Game Dev meetup Slack, but there's no official bug thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So check out the links we posted earlier, or come join us on slack.bostongamedev.com and find out all about the upcoming events for the local area. And we'll see you all in the new year.
Cool.